Welcome back, dear listeners, to the Dish with Dina podcast. I'm so happy to have you join us for another episode. Today, my guest is Susan Juray. Susan and I dish about family recipes, fueling, and following our dreams. Susan is an avid runner and registered dietitian who loves learning about food and nutrition modifications to improve athletic performance and recovery. So sit back, enjoy the conversation, and let's dish. Welcome, Susan, to the Dish with Dina podcast. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you, Dina. It's great to be here.
I am very new at this podcasting stuff, and I'm very grateful that you and I had a connection on Instagram. I believe that is where you also saw my kind of calling out to anybody who was following me, if you'd be interested on coming in and doing an interview with me. So I'm very grateful to have you as one of the first few guests on this podcast, and I'm excited to kind of see where it takes us in this direction. As I was looking in your bio, the one that you sent me about your interests and things that you're doing right now, we're going to go over a little bit about that shortly, but sometimes I have a lot of things in common with people, and in your case, I don't, which is nice because I want to learn more about what you do. So I'm excited to learn about all these things that you have going on and things that you're interested in. So can we start off by first saying where, how we met? How do we know each other?
Yeah, so like you mentioned, we met on Instagram, and we have like friends and fellow dietitians in common that we know. And it's just that I find that sometimes social media is a great place to meet other dietitians or soon to be dietitians and to share common interests or learn new things about them, and then just help like our D2Bs moving forward. It's great to be part of a dietitian community and to learn from each other and share interests.
I love it too. I often joke that we are from the future. I don't think, 30 years ago, or maybe even 10, 15 years ago, there was this much involvement with complete strangers. And then not even just strangers, but people who are so willing to want to share their passions, their pursuits, their interests with each other and be so supportive of each other as well, which is especially in this day and age where everybody's on the go, and sometimes don't necessarily have time to take out for each other. It's nice to stop and kind of learn a little bit about people in your field, or, like I said before, complete strangers on the internet that just happen to cross paths. So tell me a little bit, since the kind of the message of the theme of the podcast is really to start off with understanding cultural backgrounds, food histories, how people grew up, and then finding kind of the path of where things led you, whether or not it was positive or negatively influenced, and how, you are to where you are now. So do you mind sharing with our listeners a little bit of either your earliest food memories, what your cultural background is, how your family dynamic, any of that?
So my family is from Tajikistan. It's a country in Central Asia. And growing up, we all grew up learning how to cook, maybe like from the age of like 6. And everything was around food. It was how we stayed connected and shared like family memories. My grandmother would teach us, my mom, like it was just like a rite of passage, so to speak. And it definitely influences a lot of my passion for nutrition, because in the beginning, I didn't really think of nutrition as a career, but then once I became interested in it, everything just kind of sort of came to place with the passion of cooking and food that I have. And it's just a way that our family stayed connected, and we have recipes that were passed down from generations. And knowing what I know now as a dietitian, I definitely have changed some recipes or like tweaked them a bit, but more or less we've kept them the same just to keep the memories alive, and then just like sort of eat smaller portions, because foods tend to be higher in fat or salt, or like as traditional foods sort of are. And it's just great to keep memory alive and to share these recipes.
Did your family, how did they pass that down? Was it through oral history? Did you guys have an actual like recipe book, or did somebody compile it all?
There's actually like no recipe book. It's just passed down based like from cooking, like I mentioned, because we learned how to cook from like the age of 6. So
Mhm.
my grandmother would teach my mom, and then my mom would teach us, and my grandmother would also teach us. And then we just like pass it down from generation to generation, and that's how it's sort of been like. And the recipes have stayed the same like till this day.
I love
So
that. So you're
yeah,
still finding the ingredients and the flavors, and not
yeah,
only are
definitely.
they modernized in that way, but also they kind of bring you back in time, being like, oh my gosh, this is 3 generations or more worth of cooking the same kind of food. I
Yeah,
love that.
it
I was
definitely
asked,
keeps us connected and
yeah, is everyone in that lineage still alive to kind of see all of this happen, or are you kind of bringing this up into the new generation of where you're at now?
so my grandmother recently passed, but the what we do now is like cook a lot of her recipes in memory and honor of her
Hmm.
and celebrate it. Um, and just try to like we keep her memory alive sort of through cooking and sharing these recipes like together.
I love that. Are they intricate in the sense of my understanding, I believe, when it comes to that part of the world is there's a lot of flavors, a lot of components, a lot of ingredients that go in, but is it also very time consuming, and have you modernized any recipes aside from the, I guess, the cooking method? Have you modernized anything versus, hand stirring something and instead placing it in a food processor?
Yeah, definitely we have modernized it. Like I definitely use the food processor a lot. But most of the time I usually like if we have like these kind of sort of dumplings that we like fill with like meat, or sometimes if a vegetarian one, like me and my mom made a vegetarian one with like butternut squash instead of meat. So we try to like make adaptations and still
Yeah.
have sort of the same spices along the same, and then like um on different modernizations. So sometimes we like bake certain dishes instead of like put it cooking it on the stove. um and yeah, but more or less the recipe still stays the same, but the tools and cooking methods sometimes are um moderated,
Well,
like
right.
yeah.
And I think one of the things I teach, I'm an adjunct lecturer. One of my undergrad classes, I might have mentioned this to you, is food, society, and health. And we go through the whole world and kind of learn a little bit about the regional things the traditions, the cultures, and the regional things that they do. But even in the different food ways and the different recipes and the different flavors, there's always something that is similar in every culture, whether it be something like you said, a dumpling. So in your case, it's a dumpling. In my case, being Italian, it's probably a ravioli, right? It's a meat stuffed, or I should say, it's a dough stuffed with something in it, cheese or meat or whatever. And then as far as meal etiquette and preparations go, was there anything specific when you would sit down to these holidays and gatherings and feasts that you would have? Was there anything that you had to kind of abide by? Who ate first, or who ladled out the most amount of food for each other, or did you all kind of just come sit down and it was a family style, who grab whatever you want to eat?
So the way it typically works for us is usually we like plate everything on the table already. And typically the elders
Hmm.
are served first because respect is a big factor in our culture. And the elders usually eat like are served first, and but everything's on the table. We don't have like things coming and going. It's usually you put everything on the table, and everyone like eats at the same time.
Right. And that's something that I think we were learning as well in that class, is that there is some sort of hierarchy in the social settings and the familial settings, that you do honor and respect your elders, and whoever else was, cooking might also play a role in that too. Like maybe they get to eat first or maybe they get to eat last, depending on what the culture entails. So I always find these things really interesting. The family style component, I think I resonates with me too. I remember Sunday dinners, just huge amounts of everything, pasta and bread and different kinds of other, I think, meats and side dishes and vegetables just all over the table. And we would have, the large dining room table, and then right next to it, a smaller table for the kids. And it was exactly like you were saying, just everything was right there. You can get up, you can go for seconds. And it was just the enticing aromas. And that's something that I often think back fondly of. And I wish kind of we still had those things today. I mean, like you were saying, it sounds like you're still engaging in that. You still have a large gathering, or at least you're trying to honor the recipe making.
Yeah, so typically once a week, like Friday night, we usually do like family dinners like that, and mostly like on holidays. But throughout the week, because everyone works, everyone
Mm-hmm.
has different schedules, and it gets a bit crazy. So like one like right before the weekend, like Friday night, we do that. And holidays, we sit down, and it's just like a way to connect and
Mm-hmm.
celebrate with the family.
I love it. So take us now into kind of what brought you into, I guess, either the career you're in right now or how you navigated from being a child growing up and where you have followed the pursuits of leading you into the dietetics world.
So I became interested in nutrition after my sister was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. I started researching different ways to help her and ways to like keep her carbohydrate consistent and try to like teach her like different healthy um, habits and exercise routines. So then I thought, okay, why don't I just take a nutrition introduction to nutrition course? So I was at Hunter at the time, so I took the course, and after the first class, I just fell in love with it. I knew from that moment that that's the career that I wanted to pursue. So I stayed at Hunter, got my master's in nutrition, and then I went to the internship and got my RD, and now I'm working as a clinical dietitian with goals of getting diabetes education certificate because it's definitely something that I'm interested in, and there's so many people out there with type 2 diabetes who need guidance and help, and that's one of my goals as a dietitian is to help them.
So what started out with you helping a family member and just trying to educate yourself in something that you had no idea or maybe not a lot of information on, specifically for her condition, and now this is, I always say there's no such thing as coincidence. There's a reason why things happened that led you in that direction. And what I've also been finding too in some of the other people that I've been speaking to is that our we have a job, but we also have a career. And it sounds like you are also involved in pursuing things to help you grow and expand and be of service in that way to a particular population, but in a more specialized way than having just say the typical standard registered dietitian credential after your name. Can you tell us a little bit about what that means, what the CDE is, and what that entails, as if anybody else wants to obtain being a certified diabetes educator?
Yeah, sure. So the CD is is to become like a certified diabetes educator. So what you would need to do is you would have to be a dietitian for 2 years. And during the last 6 months of the second year, you would have to obtain like a like 1,000 hours. Not like during, but they said most of the hours should be like within the last
Mm-hmm.
6 months before you need to take the exam. But you have like the 2 years, I guess, to do the bulk of the 1,000 hours, and then you would have to take a standardized exam, and it entails like nutrition, but not only nutrition, also like different medications, the biological pathways of mechanisms of how diabetes works, how it affects the body. So what I've heard from other dietitians is that the exam is kind of hard, but I feel like a lot of them say the nutrition part, obviously, for dietitians is easier, but a lot of them were struggling with the pharmacological and because there's like new medications out every single year, they come out with different ones. So staying up to date with those, staying up to date with everything that's new in the field, new research, and applying that when you're studying.
I think this is really interesting because this goes along with what I was saying before about expanding on our careers and specializing in something, especially if you know that you're either interested in working with a specific chronic condition or you are more geared towards a certain population, be it pediatrics or people with diabetes or whatever you have, and then getting specialized in that. So that's really where it starts kind of drilling down. And that's also where you can't really expect, I don't think, us as going through what we went through in our academic pursuits of knowing all of these ins and outs. So there's the hands-on component, as you said, right? There's the 1,000 hours of actually having worked with people with diabetes. And then you still have to have the 2 years under your belt as or more of being a dietitian. So if somebody has worked with somebody in an outpatient setting or a clinical setting, and they want to pursue the CDE, they should get on it ASAP. Otherwise, those 1,000 hours can run out pretty quickly. What are you doing right now to kind of ensure your position when you're ready to take that exam?
So right now, when I started my first job, it was when the coronavirus started.
Yeah.
So my hours have been, I was a clinical dietitian in the ICU setting. So I had covered the medical and surgical ICU. So a lot of the patients I'm seeing are not diabetic. So I've been putting that on a pause. So most of the hours that I've been doing now is to treat COVID patients.
Mm-hmm.
But later, as this hopefully decreases of the amount of patients that are with COVID and the admits, I'll be put in like a med surg unit, and then I'll see like diabetes patients, because a lot of the times you can't educate patients who are COVID. It's hard because there's not enough PPE. So I've been putting that like as a pause for now, but later, hopefully I will be able to resume and see more diabetes patients with med surg units.
Yeah, so for obviously anybody listening, I'm not entirely sure of how I'm going to be scheduling these podcasts to be published out, because I think I mentioned to you, Susan, that I want to make sure that there's not too many back-to-back and repetitive guests that we have on. So I'm trying to collect a lot of interviews first. But the point that I'm trying to make is that we are in the throes of a pandemic right now, and that seems to be throwing a lot of people off of their normal daily life. So hopefully, yes, once this does wind down, then we can continue forth with our pursuits and our goals, because we are so focused on just making sure whatever's happening right now is happening. What was a day in the life of you previously? Did you have a particular clientele that you met with, or, whatever your routine was? Can you share a little bit about that as well?
Yeah, sure. So actually, like before this all happened, like this clinical job was actually my first job. But prior to this, I'm a runner, and I ran the marathon in 2018 in New York City, and that actually piqued my interest in sports nutrition as well. So I was doing that. I was interested in it, and I am still interested in that, and obtaining like my CSSD. It's a certified specialist in sports dietetics as well.
Mm-hmm.
And what I was doing is I was like helping. So I was part of a running group, and I was actually seeing a lot of the runners for nutrition counseling, and like on the side, and trying to help them with their fueling strategies for marathon training. And it definitely, those are like one of the top two things that I'm really, really interested in. And that's the one thing that I love about nutrition, is that it's vast, and you could have interest in so many things in nutrition specifically. And you don't have to stay like in one sort of specialty or one sort of interest. You could branch out and have many like goals, so to speak, with
Yeah,
this one field.
I was going to say that too, in that it's very vast, the amount of stuff that we can do, whether it is clinical or whether, again, there's population specific stuff that we can work on, or chronic condition specific stuff. But to have what your pursuits are, right? You're doing the CDE, the diabetics education. You're in clinical currently, and then you also have the sports nutrition aspect. That's many different hats. Like, I'm assuming there might be some crossover just in the general way of understanding nutrition, but my mind immediately goes to, carb counting and being consistent with carbohydrates versus carb loading if you're doing running and endurance training in that respect. So how do you switch between all those things? Or is it just, you kind of compartmentalize, or do you see any crossover that, in other words, strengthens you in whatever aspect of when you're moving in one population to the next? So if I'm working with sports people, it's one hat I'm wearing. If I'm working with people with diabetes, it's another hat I'm wearing.
I think they both connect in certain ways, because athletes are people as well, and they might have chronic conditions. Some athletes have type 1 diabetes, some athletes might have they have, there are athletes with chronic conditions, and having the medical nutrition therapy base and understanding the different properties and how to treat them first, and then going into how they fuel with that condition, is is really important, I think, and having that to like finding ways to connect them. Sometimes I guess there are going to be athletes who are healthy and don't need a medical nutrition therapy, but there's definitely like some things that interconnect, I think, between them.
Yeah, and if you're talking about the sports dietetics field, that would be obviously another credential or another certification that you're having under your belt. What is the difference there? What are things like you had mentioned before with the CDE? You're talking about nutrition, obviously, but you're also talking about medications and biopathways. What is the specialty focus in the sports dietetics? What do you need to know or focus in on when you're going for that exam or when you're going for that certification?
For the certification, so the certification is called the CSSD. It's Certified Specialist in Sports Dietetics. So to have it, to become eligible to have it, you need to be an RD for a minimum of 2 years, have 2,000 hours of sports dietetics practice experience, as an RD within the past 5 years, and then you need to recertify. Like all these certifications have recertifications as well, but specifically for this one, so the CDE I found is that you only can do 1,000 hours one-on-one counseling with patients, whether inpatient, outpatient setting. But specifically for sports dietetics, there's other things that qualify as hours. So you could write a research paper on sports nutrition, and that would count as certain hours. There's certain like a master's in nutrition would count as 300 hours. A master's in exercise science would count as I don't know the exact
Yeah.
hours, but I think it's a doctorate degree is 400 hours. But there's different things that you can do. Like if you're maybe like write a book, it's certain hours. There's different things that you could do to gain more hours, as opposed to with the CDE, it's
Mm-hmm.
strictly like 1,000 hours one-on-one. It's
See, I actually think I like the CSSD approach because it feels a little bit more liberal, but it
yeah,
also feels like you get a lot more than just sitting and doing one-on-one because that really isn't that's not the end all be all when you're working in diabetic, situations. So I actually think that's kind of cool. As you were reading that off, it was reminding me a little bit of in the dietetics world, we have to keep up with our continuing education units, like the activity logs that we have to do every 5 years. And they do give you the option of doing a bunch of different things. Like you could have read a journal article, or you could have gone to school, or you could have been working in something in research. And so that feels a lot more flexible, which I think is also making the dietitian a very well-rounded person to understand a little bit more than just the one-on-one counseling component on that.
yeah,
That's very
definitely.
cool. I'm really excited for what I hope is, it sounds like a lot on your plate at some point, but hopefully not everything's going to happen at the same time. Like maybe you'll have some breathing room from one certification to the other, I hope.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't like foresee getting these like in the next 2 years. These are like I would say these are my long-term goals, and
Understood.
just like something that I strive to get. And if hopefully it happens, because now things are been put on pause and I'm just taking it a day at a time. But it's definitely like something I look forward to obtaining.
Can you talk a little bit about, for people who don't know what the term fueling means? Now, we started the conversation of how we all grow up and we might have different backgrounds. And you also brought up that working with people in sports or, any kind of athletic world there, that obviously they might also have underlying chronic conditions, or they might be generally healthy. But what's the fueling component? What is it that means, and who is it for?
So fueling in terms of like sports nutrition, there's like there's the different types of foods and like ratios of carbohydrates and protein that you're supposed to eat, like pre exercise, during, and post. So let's say I would say, like for an example, a marathon. Let's say you're running the marathon. Um, like if you're running less than 45 minutes, you don't need to fuel because your body has enough glycogen stores to fuel that exercise. But if you're running for 1 to 2.5 hours, you have to fuel with 30 to 60 grams of carbohydrates per hour. So after every hour, you would eat like 30 grams of carbs, which would translate into like one gel. Like gels are typically ranging between like 25 to 30 grams of carbohydrates. And then after you would drink, or you could drink like Gatorade, because sometimes the
Hmm.
races have Gatorade on the running route, which would be like, I guess, 3/4 of a 20-ounce bottle of Gatorade. But I guess those cups would, like, they fill the cups up like 3/4 of the way up on the races, so that would be adequate. And then I would like tell people to like drink some water after that because it's highly concentrated in sugar. Um, and then after you would drink, I mean, you would eat 1 to 1.5 grams of carbs per kilogram of body weight 30 minutes after you exercise for 2-hour intervals. And then the protein needs would vary based on the person. So typically, what I would tell like runners is 15 to 25 grams of protein to repair muscle damage and stimulate muscle protein synthesis. I would give them like a tip to give like a 2-to-1 carbohydrate to protein ratio 15 to 30 minutes after their workout to ensure that they're repairing their muscle damage during the workout. So an example would be like an RX bar, like a power bar given after the races. They typically have like a 2-to-1 carbohydrate to protein ratio. And hydration would be like before would be 2 cups of water 2 to 3 hours before workout, and then during would be like 3 to 8 ounces of water every 15 to 20 minutes if you're exercising less than an hour, but 3 to 8 ounces of carbohydrates like and electrolyte sports drinks every 15 to 20 minutes whenever you're exercising more than 1 hour. So sometimes people drink Gatorade after not exercising for more than an hour, and
Yes.
that's not what you're supposed to do because these sports drinks were formulated specifically to replenish electrolytes that are lost in sweat and to replenish your
Hmm.
glycogen stores. So that happens after an hour, and you need to replenish it. Like if you're exercising less than an hour, it's not necessary. Water will be fine. Like water is enough. Like just stick with water if your exercise lasts less than an hour. That would be my recommendation.
You
So I
don't
would
need
just,
that extra sugar.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's really concentrated in sugar, and um, it's not necessary unless it's after like 60 minutes of
Right.
exercise.
And I'm assuming intense exercising too, and where that you are sweating quite significantly and you have to
Yeah.
replenish those stores. You said something about gels. Is that like a travel pouch that you open up while you're out and about? Like you have them somewhere tucked into a shirt or like a fanny pack or something?
Yeah, so these gels are like these like small packets of like goo, or it's like
Hmm.
they have like very different ones. It's just like carbohydrates. Like a lot of the times their base is glucose. And you just it's like I think like the most I've seen it's like 30-ish. It ranges in 25 to 30-ish grams of carbohydrates, and it's just
Hmm.
like this, like I wouldn't say jelly consistency, but it's like
Right.
a smooth like thing that you just rip off the top part and you just like squeeze it into your mouth and just like take a sip of water after and then just keep running. Some I've seen runners like eat it as they're still running.
Hmm.
I usually stop. I can't do that at the same time. But it's like just an instant glucose that you could take. A lot of times, some people eat like half of a banana. I see like people eating bananas during the race.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, they make it like easier, and you could keep them like a lot of runners wear running belts to keep them there. A lot of times people don't use gel, so they could eat like now in the market they have like jelly beans. They have these chews where it's just like it's like candy chews. A lot of times people just take like random like candies or snacks. It's like I would say everything in sports nutrition is based on the individual. It's
Hmm.
what your body can tolerate. I definitely had to go through a lot of different gels and chews and things that during my training when I was training for the marathon, I had to like test out very different ones until I found the perfect one for me. So what I was using was Huma gel. It has like it uses fruit fruit purees and chia seeds. So I thought that, and some of them have like electrolytes added to the gels that I would use during like when I was running like 20 miles during my training, and it would be like more than 2 hours that I
Hmm.
was running. So I would use those to replenish it. Because Gatorade, I found Gatorade does not suit me well. It doesn't, like, my body can't tolerate it. And it's definitely based on the individual. It's based on what you can, that's why, like, the one thing that I would say is to my clients would be to test out different products and do it while you're training, and while you're training before, like, don't ever use like a new product when you're doing a race or like a marathon, because you never know what's going to happen.
This is so interesting because we are taught in our schooling, just general dietetics, we learn about macronutrients. We learn about the percentages of your daily intake and what that means as far as carbohydrates and proteins and fats, just as being a normal, healthy adult. And the guidelines that we're given for there is, pretty standard. And then, of course, we sometimes make adjustments depending on chronic conditions, if you have a respiratory issue, or if there are rare diseases or inborn errors of metabolism, and those types of things that we can kind of adjust for. Stress issues, physical activity issues as well, that we adjust for that. But this sounds like a lot of really intense calculations that you kind of need to know, like you said, starting off where you're going, how intense of an athlete you are, or how intense your workout is going to be, and then building up and testing all these different things out and these different ratios that would, I guess, make you repair, obviously, whatever is the muscle tears and things that are going on there, but also replenish anything that you're losing. So I was laughing when you said the thing about Gatorade, because I actually use that as an example in one of my classes, that, it's one thing to be during the childhood life cycle stage. I think we usually bring up, like, when kids start joining, soccer leagues and things like that, that they might need to replenish some of those stores with Gatorade, but you don't necessarily need it if you're just going around the block and that's like you're sucking on a bottle of that to replenish yourself, because there's a purpose for it. And that sound is just such an interesting, I guess, channel of dietetics that I'm not very familiar with, but you've explained it very well. Is that true? Is it like a lot of calculations depending on who you're working with or what sports team or what, type of athletic activity you're doing in that way?
Yeah, it
Yeah.
definitely changes. So this was specifically for runners and more endurance sports, and other athletes who focus on strength training, like boxing, stuff like that, would have different carbohydrates and protein requirements and um, like needs than compared to runners, because you're not using glycogen stores. They would have higher protein needs compared to endurance runners.
Right. And so in the world of sports dietetics, do you think that it makes sense for personal trainers and, I guess, coaches or whatever to either be certified themselves as, or maybe even go back to school, or to bring in a dietitian and have somebody who specializes in dietetics and say, this is kind of our team member, I'll handle the coaching, I'll handle the training, and you handle the food combos?
It would definitely be important for them to get a specialist and a dietitian who actually studies nutrition and knows what they're talking about, as opposed to just recommending specific diets. Like, sometimes I see a lot of the times they don't have dietitians in gyms, and then their coaches are just recommending diets that eliminate certain food groups and are very restricting, and that's very bad, especially if somebody's exercising so intensely and um, needing extra needs from protein and carbohydrates. So it would be very important for them to have a specialist or to gain RD credentials themselves.
I agree. I had my little pilot episode talked about kind of how we are often overlooked as a profession, and so many people can tap into us. But I think that also helps us on this end empower ourselves to pitch ourselves in that way of saying, I'm here to support and be of service to your already existing clientele. Please utilize me in this way because I have this background as well. Oh my gosh, Susan, this is such a great amount of information. If you don't mind, I want to just switch off for a second before we start wrapping up, of kind of maybe a little bit more about what you were talking about with your go-to resources. Like, where do you usually, I like asking people, where do you usually go to learn about what you're doing? And are you involved in, conferences or groups, membership groups? Anything that you want to share in case there are people who are listening who are looking to get into this, or, found your conversation interesting, and where they can possibly go to as well to learn a little bit more about this stuff.
Yeah, sure. So I'm a member of the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, and they have certain DPG groups. So I became a member of the sports dietetics DPG group, and they have this listserv where sports dietitians ask questions and like share different resources, different like ways to communicate with patients, and like sometimes they have like really hard questions that a dietitian's asking for other dietitians for advice and how to approach it, which I find it's very helpful to read just in case like I would come up with a patient like that. And since I'm in the clinical field, I didn't like choose like the DPG for diabetes because I'm in the field and I see, and I would in the future see like more patients with diabetes. But I read a lot of papers on diabetes, so I stay up to date with the research that's specifically with diabetes management with nutrition. And it's great to relay that information and it's great to be up to date with any research in the field, because a lot of the times, even if you're treating the patient's family might come up to you and ask for like my recommendations on certain diets. Like I've had patients ask me about like ketogenic diet, intermittent fasting, and it's great to be up to date with the research to give them the pros and cons about these diets so that they would be informed about what to do before they do it.
I agree with that. So even if you're specializing in something, still pay attention to what's new in the world out there, what people are buzzing about, fad stuff or not so fad stuff, and keeping abreast of all that stuff too. So just for anybody who's listening, the DPG is a dietetic practice group. And I believe, Susan, you can correct me if I'm wrong, you belong to SCAN, the sports cardiovascular, cardiovascular wellness nutrition. That's a really cool one too. So for people who are interested, I mean, they have a website. All of these dietetic practice groups have websites that are accessible to the general public. If you are a dietitian, you don't necessarily have to be a part of the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. But when you are a member there, they have these subgroups that you can belong to as well. That, you know, of course, you got to throw a couple of bucks for your membership dues in that respect. But the general public can also look at these things, or dietitians coming up, as we were saying before, RDs to be, registered dietitians who are on their way up, who might not yet know what they want to specialize in, but they can go online and check some of these things out and see what, you know, might be maybe piques their interest in that way. So we talked a little bit about the future you, which could be the long-term future you, but the current future you, what is on your plate today? What are you working on quite literally this day, this week, and whether it's personal or work related? And then tell me a little bit too about what your next meal is going to entail, because I love talking about food.
So now I'm just like currently a clinical dietitian working, but like on the side, so I might teach the Introduction to Nutrition course at Hunter. So I'm preparing the presentations now for the fall. And then like next meal would probably be like a quinoa salad. I was making that before this was happening.
Nice. That sounds yummy. Well, Susan, it has been a pleasure talking with you. But before we officially wrap up, is there anything that you want to share to anybody that you think you have in mind that we haven't necessarily covered? Is there anything that I missed asking you?
No, I think that's great. But if anyone wants to like connect with me on Instagram or like different social medias and want to learn more, I would be happy to help anyone or any soon to be RDs with any questions.
Awesome. And this is your Instagram handle. Tell me again, it's Run on Nutrition?
Sure. Yeah, at Run on Nutrition, but it's at Run_on_nutrition.
I'm going to put that in the little show notes / description underneath the episode as well, so people can find you. Well, thank you again for your time and for being one of the very first people that I've been interviewing. I'm excited to share your journey with whoever out there is interested in learning about these things, because I really do feel like we have, even though a lot of the interviewed guests are going to be dietitians, you all have such varied backgrounds and different professions, different careers that you're working in right now within the profession, I should say. So thank you so much for taking the time to share with us. And I wish you a wonderful rest of the day.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been great speaking with you.
Thanks, Susan. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for joining me this week on the Dish with Dina podcast. I am Dina D'Alessandro, registered dietitian, nutritionist, founder, and chief executive life changer at Dish with Dina, and I'm also your host. If you like what you heard, I would be so grateful if you could subscribe to this podcast leave a review and share this with others who you think might benefit from what we have to offer on these episodes. You can also join my mailing list at dishwithdina.com or email me at info@dishwithdina.com with questions, comments, feedback, and if you'd like to be a guest on a future episode, because everybody eats and we all have a story to share. I hope you tune back in next week when we dish again.